Millionaire hears girl crying in abandoned train station that night. She makes a request that breaks him. If you love stories of courage, hope, and the power of human connection, hit that like button and tell me in the comments what you think happens next. Snow fell harder as the old train whistle echoed through the abandoned Millbrook station. Thaddeus Blackwood pulled his coat tighter, never expecting to find a small figure huddled in the shadows. A 6-year-old girl, alone and terrified, would speak words that would haunt him forever. But no one could have imagined what would happen next. The December wind cut through Thaddeus Blackwood's expensive wool coat as he stepped off the evening train at Millbrook Station. At 45, the tech mogul had grown accustomed to luxury, but tonight felt different. The old Victorian station, once grand, now stood mostly abandoned except for the occasional late commuter like himself. His leather shoes echoed against the cracked platform tiles as he walked toward the exit. The sound of his own footsteps usually comforted him, a reminder of his success, his independence. But tonight, another sound made him pause. Soft sobbing, almost lost in the howling wind. Thaddeus stopped, his businessman's instincts telling him to keep walking. He had a conference call with Tokyo in an hour, quarterly reports to review. But the crying continued, small, desperate sounds that seemed to come from the old waiting room. Against his better judgment, he followed the sound. The waiting room door creaked as he pushed it open. Victorian benches sat covered in dust and peeling paint. In the far corner, beneath a broken window, sat the smallest person he'd ever seen alone in such a place. She couldn't have been older than 6 or 7. Her blonde hair hung in tangles around her face, and her red winter coat was too thin for December weather. When she looked up at him with enormous blue eyes filled with tears, Thaddeus felt something crack inside his chest. "Hey there," he said softly, crouching down to her level. "What are you doing here all by yourself?" The little girl wiped her nose with her sleeve, studying his face carefully. "Are you one of the bad men?" she whispered. "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who heard you crying. My name is Thaddeus." "What's yours, Serafina?" she said so quietly he almost missed it. Serafina Ravencroft. The name Ravencroft made him pause. Everyone in Millbrook knew the Ravencrofts' old money, charitable foundation, pillars of the community. What was their child doing alone in an abandoned train station? "Serafina, where are your parents? Do they know where you are?" Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I ran away. I don't want to go back home. They do bad things." Thaddeus felt his throat tighten. In his world of corporate deals and board meetings, he rarely encountered genuine human vulnerability. This child's pain was raw, immediate, and undeniable. "What kind of bad things, Serafina?" She shook her head violently. "I can't tell. They said nobody would believe me anyway. They said people only care about them because they give money to churches and schools." The waiting room felt colder suddenly. Outside, snow continued to fall, coating the platform in pristine white that would soon turn to grey slush. Thaddeus looked at this tiny girl who'd chosen to run into a winter night rather than stay in what should have been the safety of her home. "How long have you been here?" "Since after dinner. I climbed out my bedroom window when they thought I was sleeping." She pulled her thin coat tighter around herself. "I don't know where else to go." Thaddeus's phone buzzed with a text about his upcoming call, but he ignored it. Something about Seraphine's desperation reminded him of himself at that age, though. His demons had been different. Loneliness rather than fear, neglect rather than abuse. "Listen, Serafina, you can't stay here. It's too cold, and it's not safe for a little girl to be alone at night." Panic flashed in her eyes. "You're going to take me back to them?" "No," he said firmly. "But I need to understand what's happening before I can help you properly. Can you tell me anything else about why you ran away?" She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "They hurt me. And they hurt my baby brother too. But everyone thinks they're such good people because of all the charity stuff they do." She looked up at him with eyes too old for her face. "Please don't make me go back there. Please don't let them find me." The businessman in Thaddeus wanted to call the proper authorities, follow protocol, but something deeper, an instinct he'd buried under years of corporate cynicism, told him this child was telling the truth. And if she was, sending her back could be the worst thing he could do. "Okay," he said gently. "Here's what we're going to do. You're going to come with me tonight, somewhere warm and safe. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the next step together. Does that sound okay?" For the first time since he'd found her, Seraphine's face showed a hint of hope. "You really won't make me go back, I promise." "But Serafina, if what you're telling me is true, we're going to have to be very careful about how we handle this. Very important people don't like being accused of bad things." She nodded solemnly, understanding more than any 6-year-old should about the complexities of power and protection. As they left the abandoned station together, Thaddeus had no idea that this chance encounter would unravel everything he thought he knew about his own past, and set in motion events that would change both their lives forever. Thaddeus's penthouse apartment had never felt more enormous than it did with 6-year-old Serafina sitting on his pristine white sofa. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of Millbrook's downtown lights, but the little girl seemed more interested in the warmth of the fireplace than the cityscape. "Are you hungry?" he asked, realizing he had no idea how to care for a child. His refrigerator contained expensive wine, leftover sushi, and not much else suitable for a 6-year-old. Serafina nodded shyly. "I didn't eat dinner. They sent me to my room before the food came." The casual way she mentioned punishment made his stomach twist. Thaddeus ordered pizza, something he hadn't done in years, and watched as she ate with the desperate hunger of someone who never knew when the next meal might come. "Serafina, I need to ask you some questions, but you don't have to answer anything that makes you uncomfortable, okay?" She nodded, still chewing pizza crust. "How long have the bad things been happening?" "Since I can remember, but it got worse. After Mama had the baby, that's when Daddy started getting really angry all the time." "Your baby brother, how old is he?" 2. "His name is Orion." Her eyes filled with tears again. "I wanted to bring him with me, but he was sleeping, and I couldn't carry him down from the window." Thaddeus felt a chill. If what Serafina was saying was true, there was another child still in danger. But he also knew he couldn't just break into the Ravencroft mansion and rescue a toddler. The family's influence in Millbrook was enormous. "Tell me about your parents. What do they do when they hurt you?" Serafina looked down at her hands. "They hit us when we cry too loud or make messes. Daddy gets really mad when we interrupt his important phone calls. And Mama, she gives us medicine that makes us sleepy when people come to visit. Medicine, she says, it's vitamins, but it makes everything fuzzy. And then we have to stay in our rooms until the visitors leave. She says children should be seen and not heard, especially during foundation meetings." The picture Serafina painted was of calculated abuse designed to maintain the family's public image, keep the children quiet and hidden when it mattered, ensure they were too afraid or medicated to speak up. Thaddeus's phone rang, the Tokyo call he'd missed earlier. He let it go to voicemail. For the first time in his career, business felt completely irrelevant. "Serafina, I want you to know that what your parents do to you and Orion isn't okay. Adults should never hurt children, no matter what." "That's what I thought too, but they said all children get punished when they're bad. They said I was just being a baby about it." The sophisticated manipulation made Thaddeus's blood boil. These people were systematically destroying their children's sense of reality and self-worth. "You're not being a baby. You're being brave. Running away to protect yourself took a lot of courage." Serafina smiled for the first time since he'd found her a real smile that transformed her entire face. "Really, really. But now we need to figure out how to protect Orion too." Her smile faded. "They'll never let him go. He's the heir. Daddy says boys are more important than girls for carrying on the family name." "The heir to what?" "The foundation, the money, all of it. Daddy says someday Orion will run everything, so he has to learn to be strong. That's why they hurt him, to make him tough." Thaddeus ran his hands through his hair, trying to process the horror of what he was hearing. The Ravencroft Foundation was worth millions, donated to children's hospitals and schools throughout the state. The irony was sickening. "Serafina, has anyone else ever tried to help you? Teachers, doctors, anyone? Mrs. Henderson at school asked me about the bruises once, but then Mama came for a meeting with her, and after that, Mrs. Henderson started acting different. She wouldn't look at me the same way." More evidence of the family's reach and influence. They could silence anyone who got too curious, as if summoned by their conversation. The doorman's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Blackwood, there are some people here to see you. They say it's about a missing child." Serafina went completely white. "They found me," she whispered, panic making her voice shake. "Please don't let them take me, please." Through the window, Thaddeus could see a black sedan parked outside his building. His mind raced. The Ravencrofts had money and connections. They probably had contacts throughout the city who could help them track down leads quickly. A missing child would generate immediate cooperation from most people. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, kneeling in front of Serafina. "I'm going to talk to them, but I'm not going to let them hurt you. Do you trust me?" She nodded, though terror still filled her eyes. "I need you to go into my bedroom and hide in the walk-in closet. Stay there no matter what you hear, okay? Don't come out until I come get you personally." As Serafina disappeared into the bedroom, Thaddeus straightened his tie and prepared to face the most powerful family in Millbrook. He had no legal right to keep their child, and they had every right to demand her return. But sometimes, he thought grimly, doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. The elevator doors opened to reveal three people. Cornelius Ray, a distinguished man in his 50s with silver hair and cold blue eyes. His wife, Arabella, blonde and elegant in the way that expensive clothes and regular spa treatments could achieve. And Detective Morrison, a man Thaddeus recognized from charity events. "Mr. Blackwood," Cornelius said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for agreeing to see us at this late hour." "Of course. Please, come in." Thaddeus led them to his living room, hyper-aware of the pizza box on the coffee table, evidence of his unexpected guest. Arabella's gaze swept the room with calculating precision. "We understand you may have encountered our daughter this evening," Detective Morrison said. "Serafina has been missing since dinner time. We're worried sick." The concern in his voice sounded genuine, but Thaddeus noticed how Morrison deferred to the Raven. The detective was clearly here as a favor, not in any official capacity. "I did meet a little girl at the train station," Thaddeus said carefully. "She seemed upset." "Where is she now?" Arabella asked, her voice sharp with barely controlled emotion. Though whether it was worry or anger, Thaddeus couldn't tell. "I took her to social services. Given her condition, I thought it was the appropriate thing to do." It was a lie, but a calculated one. If they believed Serafina was already in the system, they might reveal more about their true intentions. Cornelius's composure cracked slightly. "Social services? That was completely unnecessary. Serafina has behavioral issues. She's been seeing specialists. Sometimes she gets confused and makes up stories." "What kinds of stories?" Thaddeus asked innocently. "Nothing important," Arabella said quickly. "She has an overactive imagination. The doctors say it's a phase some children go through when they're seeking attention. She mentioned being hurt. I felt obligated to report it." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Detective Morrison shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. "Mr. Blackwood," Cornelius said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "I think you misunderstood what you saw. Serafina is a troubled child who often fabricates elaborate scenarios. We've had to deal with these episodes before. She's claimed everything from monsters in her closet to aliens in the backyard. The child psychiatrist says it's her way of processing normal childhood discipline. She dramatizes ordinary consequences into elaborate persecution fantasies." The way Cornelius spoke, clinical, detached, made Thaddeus's skin crawl. This was a man who had turned gaslighting into an art form. "I see. And what does the psychiatrist recommend?" "Consistency, structure, and not enabling her fantasies by giving them credence," Arabella said. "Which is why it's so important she comes home tonight. Disrupting her routine only makes the behavioral issues worse." Thaddeus nodded. Thoughtfully, "That makes sense. I'm sure social services will want to verify that with her doctor before releasing her." Another crack in Cornelius's facade. "Which office did you take her to? We can contact them directly." "I'm not sure of the exact protocol they follow after hours. I just called the emergency line and handed her over to the caseworker, who responded." It was all lies, but Thaddeus was buying time to think. These people were clearly desperate to get Serafina back quickly, before she could tell her story to anyone official. Detective Morrison cleared his throat. "Mr. Blackwood, perhaps you could call the emergency line again. I'm sure they could tell us which facility she was taken to." "Of course." Thaddeus pulled out his phone, pretending to scroll through contacts. "Actually, you know what? The caseworker gave me her card. Let me find it." He walked toward his bedroom, supposedly to get the imaginary card. As he passed the closet door, he heard the faintest whisper, "Are they gone yet?" His heart nearly stopped. If any of them heard her. "Let me check my desk," he called back loudly, hoping to cover any other sounds Serafina might make. When he returned to the living room, The three visitors were huddled in quiet conversation. They separated quickly as he approached. "I'm sorry, I can't seem to find the card, but I'm sure I can get the information for you in the morning." Cornelius stood up, his patience clearly exhausted. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm going to be direct with you. My daughter is a sick little girl who needs specialized care that only her family can provide. Whatever story she told you, whatever you think you saw, I assure you it was a misunderstanding. And if it wasn't," the question hung in the air like a challenge. Arabella's hands clenched into fists, while Detective Morrison looked like he wanted to disappear into the expensive furniture. "Then you would be accusing some of Millbrook's most respected citizens of child abuse, based on the word of a mentally disturbed 6-year-old, Cornelius said quietly. "That would be unwise." The threat was subtle but unmistakable, Thaddeus felt. A chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather outside. "I understand your position," he said carefully, "just as I'm sure you understand mine. I did what I thought was right given the circumstances." "Of course," Cornelius said, his smile returning. "We appreciate your civic responsibility. We just want our little girl home safely." As they moved toward the door, Arabella turned back. "Mr. Blackwood, when you speak to social services tomorrow, I hope you'll remember that Serafina is a very troubled child who needs professional help, not amateur intervention." After they left, Thaddeus stood at his window, watching their sedan disappear into the night. These people weren't just abusers, they were sophisticated manipulators who had clearly done this before. "Serafina," he called softly. "They're gone." She emerged from the closet, tears streaming down her face. "I heard them talking about me. They said I was crazy." "You're not crazy, sweetheart. But we have a big problem. They're going to be looking for you everywhere, and they have friends in powerful places. What are we going to do?" Thaddeus looked down at this brave little girl who had trusted him with her darkest secrets. He thought about his comfortable life, his successful business, his reputation in the community. Everything he'd worked for could be destroyed if he continued down this path. But then he thought about Orion, still trapped in that house. And he thought about Seraphine's courage in running away into a winter night rather than endure another day of abuse. "We're going to fight back," he said. "But first, we need proof." The next morning, Thaddeus called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years. While Serafina slept in his guest room, he sat at his computer researching everything he could find about the Ravencroft family and their foundation. On the surface, they were pillars of the community. Cornelius served on the hospital board and the university's board of trustees. Arabella chaired 3 different children's charities. Their foundation had donated millions to causes throughout the state. But as Thaddeus dug deeper, he found some interesting inconsistencies. Employee turnover at their household staff was unusually high. 3 different nannies had left their employment in the past 2 years, all citing family reasons for their departure. More intriguingly, there were sealed court records from 7 years ago, right around the time Serafina would have been born. The case number suggested it was related to child services, but the records had been classified under a judge's order. "Mr. Thaddeus," Seraphine's small voice interrupted his research. She stood in the doorway wearing one of his old t-shirts as a makeshift nightgown, her blonde hair sticking up at odd angles. "Good morning, sweetheart. How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in a long time. Your bed is really soft." She padded over to where he was sitting. "What are you looking at?" "Information about your family. I'm trying to understand how we can help Orion." Her face lit up at the mention of her brother. "Can we really save him?" "I'm going to try. But I need you to help me understand some things." First, he closed the laptop and turned to face her. "Serafina, you mentioned that your parents give you medicine to make you sleepy. Do you remember what it looks like?" She nodded eagerly. "Little white pills. Mama crushes them up and puts them in our juice. She says it's vitamins, but vitamins don't make you feel dizzy and weird. And this happens when people come to visit. Especially for foundation meetings. Mama says donors don't want to be bothered by noisy children, so we have to be practically invisible." She made air quotes with her small fingers, clearly repeating something she'd heard many times. Thaddeus felt his anger building again. Not only were they abusing their children, they were drugging them to maintain their public image. "Have you ever seen a doctor for anything? Checkups? When you were hurt?" "Dr. Pemberton comes to the house sometimes, but he only talks to Mama and Daddy. He never asks me questions or anything." Another piece of the puzzle. A private doctor who made house calls and apparently never filed reports about suspicious injuries. Serafina, I need to ask you something. Very important, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Are there any other adults who have seen what your parents do? Anyone who might be willing to help us? She was quiet for a long moment, her small face scrunched in concentration. There's Alina. She's the cleaning lady. She's seen the bruises, and once she saw Daddy hit me. She looked really upset, but she didn't say anything. Does Alina still work for your family? I think so. She comes on Tuesdays and Fridays. She's really nice. She speaks Spanish sometimes, and she always saves me cookies from her lunch. Thaddeus felt a spark of hope. A witness with no loyalty to the family. Someone who might be willing to speak up if approached correctly. What's her last name? I don't know. Mama just calls her the help. Seraphine's voice carried a note of disgust at her mother's casual cruelty. The intercom buzzed, making them both jump. Mr. Blackwood, there's a Mrs. Morrison here to see you. She says it's about the matter from last night. Thaddeus felt his blood pressure spike. Tell her I'll be right down. Who's Mrs. Morrison? Serafina asked, picking up on his tension. The detective's wife, I think. You need to hide again, okay? Same place as last night. But as Serafina hurried toward the bedroom, she stopped suddenly. Mr. Thaddeus, what if they never stop looking for me? What if I can never go back to school or play outside or anything? The question hit him like a physical blow. In his focus on protecting her from immediate danger, he hadn't fully considered the long-term implications. Asterisk, a 6-year-old couldn't live in hiding indefinitely. We'll figure it out, he promised. But right now, I need you to stay hidden while I deal with Mrs. Morrison. The woman waiting in his lobby was nothing like what he'd expected. Where Detective Morrison was tall and imposing, his wife was small and nervous-looking, with graying brown hair and worried eyes. Mrs. Morrison, I'm Thaddeus Blackwood. How can I help you? Is there somewhere private we can talk? It's about the little girl. He led her to a small conference room off the lobby, his mind racing with possibilities. Was this another attempt by the Ravencrofts to get to Serafina? Mr. Blackwood, I need you to know that my husband doesn't know I'm here. And if anyone asks, we never had this conversation. I'm listening. Mrs. Morrison took a shaky breath. 5 years ago, I was a social worker. I investigated a report of child abuse at the Ravencroft house. Anonymous tip. Someone said they'd seen suspicious injuries on their 1-year-old daughter. Thaddeus felt his pulse quicken. What did you find? Everything looked perfect on the surface. Beautiful house, well-dressed parents. The toddler appeared healthy during the visit, but something felt wrong. The parents were too coached, too prepared, and there were prescription medications in the house that seemed excessive for a family with a toddler. What kind of medications? Sedatives, anti-anxiety drugs, things that could be used to keep a child quiet if you crushed them up and mixed them into food or drinks. She looked directly at him. I tried to dig deeper, but suddenly my supervisor pulled me off the case, said there wasn't enough evidence to proceed, and that the family's pediatrician had submitted a clean bill of health. Their pediatrician, Dr. Pemberton. Everything was documented properly. Vaccinations, checkups, growth charts, all perfectly normal on paper, but I never got to speak to him directly before the case was closed. And now my husband comes home last night talking about finding that same little girl, and how the family just wants her home safely. But I saw his face, Mr. Blackwood. He's not comfortable with this situation either. Mrs. Morrison leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. That little girl, Serafina, is she safe? Thaddeus studied her face carefully. Every instinct told him this woman was genuine, but after last night's encounter, he couldn't afford to trust easily. What makes you think she's not safe with her family? Because 5 years ago, I was forced to close a case I knew in my gut was legitimate. And because children don't run away from loving homes on December nights unless something is very, very wrong. The pain in her voice convinced him. This was someone who'd been carrying guilt for 7 years. Someone who'd been forced to abandon a child she'd tried to protect. If I were to tell you that everything you suspected 7 years ago was true, what would you do about it? Whatever it takes to protect that little girl, she said without hesitation, and her little brother too. For the first time since finding Serafina at the train station, Thaddeus didn't feel completely alone in this fight. Her name is Margaret, Mrs. Morrison said as they rode the elevator back to Thaddeus's penthouse. Margaret Chun Morrison. And what I'm about to show you could cost both of us everything. Serafina emerged from hiding cautiously when Thaddeus called to her. When she saw the unfamiliar woman, She immediately moved closer to Thaddeus's side. "It's okay, sweetheart. Mrs. Morrison used to be a social worker. She tried to help you when you were a baby." Margaret knelt down to Seraphine's level, her eyes filling with tears. "Hello, Seraphina. You've grown so much since I last saw you. You knew me when I was little." "I did. And I'm so sorry I couldn't help you then. But I'm here to help you now." Margaret opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick file. "I never turned in my original notes from the Ravencroft investigation. Technically, I should have destroyed them years ago, but something told me to keep them." She spread photos across Thaddeus's coffee table, pictures of prescription bottles, handwritten notes, even a few covert photos of the Ravencroft house's interior. "This is Dr. Pemberton's prescription history for the family," she said, pointing to a list. "Look at the quantities of sedatives ordered for a household with one infant. Enough to keep a small child unconscious for days at a time." Seraphina climbed onto the sofa next to Thaddeus, studying the papers with intense curiosity. "That's the medicine Mama gives us," she said, pointing to one of the prescription bottles. "I recognize the name on the label. Lorazepam," Margaret read, "a powerful anti-anxiety medication that would be extremely dangerous to give to children." Thaddeus felt sick. How did they get away with this for so long? Money, influence, and a system that's designed to protect families rather than investigate them. Margaret said bitterly. "The Ravencrofts donate to the Police Benevolent Fund, the judge's re-election campaign, even the Social Services Department's annual charity drive." She pulled out another document. "But there's more. Before Seraphina was born, there was another child, a boy named Jasper. He died at 8 months old. SIDS, officially, but the medical examiner's notes, which I accessed through back channels, mentioned some inconsistencies." The room went silent. Seraphina looked between the adults, clearly sensing the gravity of what she'd just heard, but not fully understanding it. "You think they killed their first baby?" Thaddeus asked quietly. "I think Jasper's death is why they became so sophisticated in their methods. They learned to be more careful, more calculated. By the time Seraphina was born, they had perfected their system." Thaddeus looked down at Seraphina, trying to imagine the level of evil required to systematically abuse children while maintaining a public facade of charity and respectability. "What about Alina, the cleaning lady?" Seraphina says. "She's witnessed some of the abuse." Margaret's eyes lit up. "Elena Vasquez. I remember her from my original investigation. She was nervous then, clearly wanted to say something but was terrified, afraid of what Elena's undocumented. Her husband works construction for one of the Ravencroft's business associates. Her 3 kids attend school under a special program the foundation sponsors. She's not just afraid of losing her job, she's afraid of deportation that would separate her from her American-born children." Another layer of the Ravencroft's control revealed. They didn't just use wealth and influence, they held people's entire families hostage. "But," Margaret continued, "that also means she's been documenting everything she sees. People in vulnerable situations often keep detailed records as protection." "What do you mean?" "When I worked with undocumented families, they often kept meticulous notes about their employers, dates, times, witnesses. It's survival instinct. If something went wrong, they'd need proof of what really happened." Seraphina tugged on Thaddeus's sleeve. "Mr. Thaddeus, if Alina can't help because she's scared, how are we going to save Orion?" It was the question that had been haunting him since the night before. Even with Margaret's evidence, they were still just accusations against one of the most powerful families in the state. "I have an idea," Margaret said slowly, "but it would require us to be very smart about this." "What kind of idea?" Seraphina asked. Margaret looked at her with the respect she would show any brave person, regardless of age. "We need current evidence of what your parents do. Not just my old files, but something that proves they're still hurting you and Orion right now." "Like what?" "Like Elena's records, if she's been keeping them. And like getting you safely examined by an independent doctor who can document current injuries and signs of systematic abuse." Thaddeus felt a wave of hope mixed with caution. "That's much safer than what I thought you were going to suggest. The key is Alina. If she's been documenting incidents like I suspect, and if we can convince her to come forward with immigration protection in place, we'd have an inside witness with detailed records." Seraphina tilted her head thoughtfully. "Alina always looks really sad when she sees the bruises, and she takes pictures of everything she cleans. She showed me once. She said it's so people can't blame her for breaking things that were already broken." Margaret and Thaddeus exchanged meaningful glances. "Serafina," Margaret said gently, "when Elena takes pictures of things that are broken, does she ever take pictures of other things like what? Like rooms after something bad happens, or things that might show someone was hurt?" She was quiet for a long moment, her small hands folded in her lap. When she looked up, her blue eyes held a determination that took Thaddeus's breath away. "They hurt Orion yesterday because I wasn't there to take the punishment instead. If I don't go back, they'll keep hurting him. And if I do go back and we don't get proof, they'll hurt both of us forever." She looked between the two adults. "So really, this is the only choice that might save us both?" Margaret nodded slowly. "We'd have to be extremely careful. The recording device would have to be completely hidden, and we'd need a way to get you out safely once we had what we needed. How would we do that? We'd need help from someone inside the house, someone who has access and a reason to be there regularly." "Elena," Thaddeus said, understanding, "but you said she's too afraid to speak up." "She's too afraid to speak up, but she might be willing to help if we can guarantee her family's safety." Margaret turned to Serafina. "Honey, do you think Elena would help you if she knew it could stop the bad things from happening?" Serafina nodded without hesitation. "Elena always looks sad when she sees the bruises. I think she wants to help, but doesn't know how." Thaddeus felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern had been quarterly profit margins. Now he was contemplating sending a 6-year-old back into an abusive home as an undercover agent. But as he looked at Seraphine's determined face, he realized something crucial. This wasn't his decision to make. This brave little girl had already decided to fight for her brother. His job was to make sure she had the best possible chance of succeeding and of surviving. The plan they developed over the next 6 hours was carefully constructed around protecting Serafina while gathering evidence. Margaret would use her connections in the immigration legal community to offer Elena protection in exchange for her cooperation. Meanwhile, Thaddeus would arrange for Serafina to be examined by a pediatric specialist who worked with abuse cases, someone who could document current evidence of systematic maltreatment. "The key is timing this right," Margaret explained as they sat around Thaddeus's dining table, papers and laptops spread between them. "Elena works at the house tomorrow, Friday. If we can approach her correctly, she might be willing to share whatever documentation she's been keeping." "And if she hasn't been keeping records?" Thaddeus asked. "Then we work with what we have, plus the medical evidence from Seraphine's examination, combined with my original investigation files. It might be enough to get a court order for a surprise inspection of the house." Serafina had been quiet during most of their planning, but now she looked up from the drawing she'd been working on. "What about Orion? If they get really mad about me running away, they might hurt him worse." It was the question that haunted all of them. Any action they took carried the risk of escalating the abuse for the child still trapped in that house. "That's why we have to move fast once we start," Margaret said. "If Elena cooperates and we have solid evidence, we can get emergency custody orders for both of you within 24 hours. But what if Elena's too scared? What if she won't help?" Margaret studied Seraphine's drawing. It showed a small house with dark windows and 2 tiny figures inside. "Serafina, in all the time Elena has worked for your family, has she ever tried to protect you or Orion in small ways? Sometimes she leaves extra snacks in places where Mama and Daddy won't see them. And once, when I had a really bad bruise on my arm, she put some of her medicine on it, the stuff that makes pain go away. That tells me Elena's heart is in the right place. She's just been waiting for a way to help that won't destroy her own family." Thaddeus looked at the brave little girl who had endured so much and was now planning to help save her brother. In just 3 days, Serafina had become the center of his world in a way he never could have imagined. "Serafina," he said gently, "I want you to know that no matter what happens with Elena or the courts or anything else, you're never going back to that house. You're safe now, and you're going to stay safe." She looked up at him with those remarkable blue eyes that seemed far too old for her face. "And Orion too. And Orion too. I promise." Margaret gathered up her papers and prepared to leave. Tomorrow would determine everything, whether Elena would find the courage to speak up, whether the evidence would be strong enough to convince a judge, whether they could save both children before it was too late. As Serafina helped Thaddeus clear the dinner dishes, she said quietly, "Mr. Thaddeus, thank you for not sending me back when they came to your door that first night." Thank you for trusting me enough to let me help you." She smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face. "I think tomorrow is going to be a good day. I can feel it." Thaddeus hoped she was right. Everything depended on tomorrow going exactly according to plan. Friday morning arrived, grey and cold, with fresh snow covering the streets of Millbrook. While Serafina slept, Thaddeus and Margaret finalized their approach to Alina. They had one chance to get this right. If Alina refused to help, or worse, if she warned the Ravencrofts about their investigation, everything would be lost. Margaret had contacted Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatric specialist who worked with the state's Child Advocacy Center. Dr. Chen had agreed to examine Serafina that afternoon, understanding the urgency and sensitivity of the situation. The examination would provide current medical evidence of abuse, something that couldn't be dismissed or explained away by the Ravencrofts' lawyers. "Alina typically arrives at the Ravencroft house at 9 a.m., Margaret said, checking her notes. "She'll be alone for the first 2 hours, while the family is out. Cornelius at his office, Arabella at a foundation board meeting. What about the children?" "Serafina would normally be at school, but she's been sick according to the school records. Orion stays home. He's never been enrolled in any daycare or preschool program." This isolation was another red flag. Most wealthy families would ensure their toddlers had social interaction and early education opportunities. Serafina emerged from the guest room, looking small and vulnerable in Thaddeus's oversized clothes. "Are we going to help Orion today?" "We're going to try, sweetheart. But I need you to be very patient while the adults handle the complicated parts." She nodded solemnly. "Alina always looks sad when she sees the bruises. I think she wants to help, but doesn't know how." At exactly 9:15 a.m., Margaret drove to the affluent neighborhood where the Ravencroft mansion sat behind iron gates and manicured hedges. The house was a testament to old money, 3 stories of Georgian architecture that spoke of generations of wealth and respectability. It was almost impossible to imagine the horrors that took place behind those elegant windows. Elena's beat-up Honda Civic was parked in the service entrance. Margaret took a deep breath, checked her credentials one more time, and walked up to the servants' entrance. Alina Vasquez was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and work-worn hands. When she opened the door and saw Margaret's official identification, the color drained from her face. "I'm not here to cause trouble for you, Alina," Margaret said quickly in Spanish. "I'm here because I think you're the only person who can help save those children." Alina glanced nervously around the kitchen, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "I don't know what you mean, Señora. 5 years ago, I investigated this family. I know you've seen things. I know you care about those children. And I know you've been waiting for someone to give you a safe way to speak up." Tears filled Elena's eyes. "Those poor babies," she whispered. "I hear them crying at night when I work late. I see the marks on their little bodies. But if I say anything, what would happen if you spoke up?" "Mr. Cornelius, eh? He knows things about my family, about how we came here. He says if I ever cause problems, he'll make sure we get sent back to El Salvador, where my husband will be killed by the gangs." Margaret felt a chill. This wasn't just about immigration status, it was about life and death threats. "Alina, what if I told you there was a way to protect your family while also protecting Serafina and Orion?" Alina was quiet for a long moment, her hands shaking as she gripped the doorframe. Finally, she stepped aside to let Margaret enter. "What I tell you, it cannot come back to hurt my children. I promise you'll be protected. But I need to know, have you been keeping any records of what you've seen?" Alina led her to a small closet off the kitchen where cleaning supplies were stored. Behind the bottles of bleach and floor cleaner, she pulled out a waterproof container. Inside were dozens of photographs, detailed handwritten notes, and even some audio recordings made on Elena's phone. "I started writing things down after the first time I saw Mr. Cornelius hit Serafina when she was 3 years old. She was so small, and she just fell down and didn't move for a long time. I was so scared she was dead." Margaret examined the photographs with growing horror. Images of bruises, broken furniture, rooms in disarray after violent episodes. But also documentation of the systematic drugging, pictures of crushed pills mixed into children's food, empty prescription bottles with suspicious quantities. "Alina, this is incredible documentation. But I have to ask, are you prepared to testify about what you've witnessed? It would mean facing the Ravencrofts in court." Alina straightened her shoulders, and Margaret saw steel beneath her gentle exterior. If it saves those babies, yes, I will tell everyone what I have seen. Margaret called Thaddeus immediately. We have everything we need, she said. Elena has been documenting abuse for 3 years. We have photographs, detailed notes, even recordings. What's our next move? We file for emergency custody tomorrow morning. With Elena's evidence, Dr. Chen's medical examination, and my original case files, we should be able to get both children removed from that house within 24 hours. But as Margaret spoke, Elena suddenly grabbed her arm. Senora, Teresa, something else. Something that happened last week. What do you mean? Elena's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I heard Mr. Cornelius on the phone talking about Serafina. He said she was getting too old, too smart, that she might start telling people things. What did he mean by that? He was talking about sending her away, to a special school where problem children learn to be quiet. But the way he said it, Elena shuddered. I don't think it was really a school. Margaret felt ice in her veins. The conversation suggested the Ravencrofts were planning to permanently silence Serafina before she could expose them. When is this supposed to happen? Soon, maybe this weekend. That's why I've been so scared. I think they're planning something terrible. The timeline had just accelerated dramatically. They didn't have 24 hours to build a perfect case. They had to act immediately, or they might lose Serafina forever. Dr. Sarah Chen's examination of Serafina took place in a child-friendly medical suite designed to minimize trauma for young abuse victims. The room was painted in soft pastels, with toys and books scattered around to help children feel comfortable during what was often a frightening experience. Thaddeus waited in the hallway, pacing like an expectant father. Every few minutes, he could hear Seraphine's voice through the door, sometimes answering questions, sometimes crying softly. Each sound made his chest tighten with protective fury. Meanwhile, Margaret worked frantically to expedite the legal process. Instead of waiting until Monday to file papers, she was pulling in favors to get an emergency weekend hearing with Judge Harrison. After an hour, Dr. Chen emerged from the examination room with a grave expression. Mr. Blackwood, could I speak with you privately? They moved to her office while Serafina remained with a child advocate who specialized in making young victims feel safe and heard. What I found is consistent with chronic, systematic abuse, Dr. Chen said without preamble. Multiple healed fractures, some as recent as 2 weeks old. Scarring, consistent with being struck with objects, and clear signs of malnutrition despite living in a wealthy household. Thaddeus felt sick. How bad is it? Bad enough that this child should have been removed from that environment years ago. But there's something else, something that concerns me greatly. She pulled out a test result sheet. Seraphine's blood work shows traces of lorazepam, a powerful sedative. The levels suggest regular administration over months, possibly years. For a child her size and age, these dosages could cause permanent neurological damage. They've been drugging her systematically, and if they're doing this to Serafina, I can only imagine what they're doing to a 2-year-old. Dr. Chun's phone rang. It was Margaret calling with an update. Judge Harrison has agreed to an emergency Saturday morning hearing. Margaret's voice came through the speaker. But we need to serve papers today to make it official. There's a complication, Dr. Chen interrupted. The medical evidence shows ongoing chemical sedation. If Orion has been subjected to the same treatment, removing him abruptly could cause dangerous withdrawal symptoms. What do you recommend? We need a pediatric team standing by when we remove him, and possibly emergency medical intervention. These children aren't just being abused, they're being systematically poisoned. As they discussed logistics, Thaddeus found himself thinking about something that had been nagging at him since he'd first found Serafina. Her eyes, those distinctive blue eyes that seemed so familiar, and her mannerisms, the way she tilted her head when thinking. Margaret, he said suddenly, in your original investigation 5 years ago, do you remember anything about Seraphine's background? Where she came from before the Ravencrofts? There were some irregularities in the adoption paperwork, but I never got to fully investigate before the case was closed. Why? I don't know. Something about her just seems familiar. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Thaddeus, did you ever know a woman named Rachel Morrison? The name hit him like lightning. Rachel, beautiful, kind Rachel who'd worked briefly at his company's marketing firm 7 years ago. They'd had a brief but intense relationship. She'd left suddenly, saying she needed to move back home to care for her sick mother. Yes, I knew Rachel. We dated for about 3 months 7 years ago, but she moved away and we lost touch. Thaddeus. Rachel Morrison died in childbirth 6 years ago. The baby was placed for adoption through a private agency, one that had connections to the Ravencroft Foundation. The room seemed to spin around him. Are you saying? I'm saying we should probably run a DNA test, just to be sure. The possibility was overwhelming. Could Serafina actually be his biological daughter? It would explain the instant connection he'd felt, the protective instincts that had surprised him with their intensity. Let's focus on getting both children safe first, he said, trying to push down the emotional chaos. Everything else can wait. But as they prepared to serve custody papers on the Ravencrofts, Thaddeus couldn't shake the feeling that this case was about to become much more personal than he'd ever imagined. Margaret's phone buzzed with an urgent text from Elena. Family came home early. Mr. Cornelius very angry, packing suitcases. I think they're leaving tonight. The timeline had just collapsed completely. If the Ravencrofts were planning to flee with Orion, they had hours, not days, to act. We need to move now, Margaret said grimly, before they disappear with that little boy forever. The emergency custody hearing took place in Judge Harrison's chambers at 8 a.m. Saturday morning, highly unusual. But the evidence Margaret presented made the urgency clear. Elena's photographs, Dr. Chen's medical report, and the testimony about the family's apparent flight plans convinced the judge to sign immediate removal orders. This is one of the most disturbing cases I've seen in 20 years on the bench, Judge Harrison said as he signed the papers. These children need to be removed immediately. Detective Hayes coordinated with Child Protective Services to execute the orders. Given the Ravencrofts' wealth and connections, they approached the mansion with a full team. Police officers, social workers, and medical personnel. Thaddeus waited in his car with Serafina, who had insisted on coming to help comfort Orion when he was rescued. Through the mansion's tall windows, they could see figures moving around inside. The family was clearly home and aware that something was happening. I can see Mama in the front window, Serafina said quietly. She looks really mad. Through the glass, Arabella Ravencroft stood like a statue, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early morning chaos. Even from a distance, her fury was palpable. The front door opened before the police could knock. Cornelius Ravencroft emerged, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits, clearly lawyers who had been summoned despite the early hour. Officers, Cornelius said with the commanding voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Whatever allegations have been made against my family, I assure you they're completely unfounded. Detective Hayes held up the custody order. Mr. Ravencroft, we have court orders for the immediate removal of both Serafina and Orion Ravencroft from these premises. Please step aside. One of the lawyers stepped forward. My client disputes the validity of these orders. We demand an immediate hearing before any action is taken. The hearing already took place. The orders are valid and will be executed. Where is the 2-year-old child? From inside the house came a sound that made everyone freeze, a child's weak crying. So faint it was almost lost in the morning air. Serafina bolted from the car before anyone could stop her. Orion, she screamed, running toward the house. Detective Hayes caught her before she could reach the door, but her voice had been heard inside. The crying grew louder, more desperate, the sound of a very young child calling for his sister. That's my brother, Serafina sobbed, struggling in the detective's arms. He needs me. Please let me get him. Cornelius's composure finally cracked. Get that child away from here, he snarled. She's the problem. She's been filling Orion's head with lies and making him afraid of his own parents. It was exactly the wrong thing to say. Detective Hayes's expression hardened. Officers, secure the premises. Elena appeared in the doorway, carrying a small, limp figure wrapped in a blanket. Even from across the driveway, it was clear the 2-year-old Orion was in serious medical distress. He can barely wake up, Elena called out in English, her voice breaking. They gave him too much medicine when they saw the police cars coming. Dr. Chen, who had been waiting with the medical team, rushed to Elena's side and immediately began assessing the toddler. This child needs immediate medical intervention. She called to her team. Serafina broke free from Detective Hayes and ran to Elena and her brother. When she saw Orion's condition, his pale skin, his labored breathing, his barely conscious state, she began to cry with a desperation that tore at everyone's hearts. Wake up, Orion, she whispered, touching his small hand. It's Ciro. I'm here now. You're safe. The little boy's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his sister's voice. When he saw her face, he managed the faintest smile before his eyes closed. Again, Ciro, he whispered, the word barely audible. As the medical team worked to stabilize Orion, Margaret served the custody papers on the Ravencrofts. Cornelius and Arabella were officially losing their parental rights, pending a full investigation. You have no idea what you've done, Cornelius shouted as handcuffs were placed on his wrists. My family has influence you can't imagine. This won't stand. But his threats felt hollow now. Elena's documentation, combined with Dr. Chen's medical evidence and the obvious condition of both children, had built an unshakable case. As Orion was loaded into the ambulance, Serafina climbed in beside him, holding his tiny hand and singing softly a lullaby. She'd apparently used to comfort him during their worst moments at home. Thaddeus followed the ambulance to Children's Hospital, his heart breaking for these two children who had endured so much. But there was also hope now, hope that with proper medical care and love, both children could heal from their trauma. At the hospital, while medical teams worked to clear the sedatives from Orion's system, Thaddeus found himself staring at Serafina as she refused to leave her brother's bedside. Those blue eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she protected Orion with fierce determination. Margaret appeared beside him with a manila envelope. The DNA results came back faster than expected. She said quietly, I had them rushed given the circumstances. Thaddeus's hands shook as he opened the envelope. The results were clear and undeniable. Serafina was his biological daughter. Rachel had been pregnant when she left him 7 years ago. She'd given birth alone and died shortly after, leaving their daughter to be placed with the Ravencrofts through what had appeared to be a legitimate adoption but was actually part of their network of acquiring children. Looking at Serafina now, his daughter Thaddeus felt a mixture of joy and rage. Joy at discovering he had this incredible, brave child. Rage that she'd spent 6 years being abused by people who had no right to her. Does she need to know right away? He asked Margaret. That's up to you. But Thaddeus, she's been through so much trauma. Learning that her daddy was really out there looking for her might actually help her healing process. As if sensing his gaze, Serafina looked up from Orion's bedside. She studied his face with those familiar blue eyes, his eyes, and tilted her head in that way he now recognized as his own habit. Mr. Thaddeus, are you okay? You look like you want to tell me something important. He knelt beside her chair, taking her small hands in his larger ones. Serafina, there's something very special I need to tell you. Something about who you are, and who I am, and how we found each other. 3 days later, Orion was stable after clearing the sedatives from his system. Dr. Chen reported excellent progress. His cognitive development was returning to normal, and the medical team was optimistic about his full recovery. Serafina rarely left her brother's bedside, reading him stories and singing lullabies. When Thaddeus had explained that he was her biological father, that her birth mother, Rachel, had died shortly after she was born, she'd accepted it with remarkable calm. Always knew someone out there loved me, she'd said simply. I used to pretend my real daddy was looking for me. Margaret brought legal updates. The Ravencrofts were denied bail. Elena's evidence had led to rescuing 3 more children from the trafficking network, and the court had fast-tracked custody proceedings for both children. Orion's biological parents died in an overdose 2 years ago, Margaret explained. The Ravencrofts acquired him through the same illegal network. You can adopt him officially. When Orion looked up from his picture book and said, Daddy, for the first time, Thaddeus felt his heart nearly burst with emotion. 6 months later, both children had transformed completely. Serafina thrived in 1st grade, making friends easily and showing remarkable resilience. Her teachers marveled at how she protected other lonely children. Trauma had taught her empathy beyond her years. Orion, now almost 3, was developmentally on track and bubbling with typical toddler energy. His speech had caught up, and he followed Thaddeus everywhere, chattering constantly about his toy adventures. The legal proceedings had concluded with life sentences for the Ravencrofts. Their trafficking network was dismantled, with Elena's documentation helping convict 12 other adults. Elena herself had become a national hero, working with Child Protective Services and helping rescue 18 additional children. Margaret had moved nearby, becoming the grandmother both children had never had. Their Saturday morning breakfasts had become a cherished family tradition. The governor wants to meet you, Margaret announced one morning. The children's courage had inspired new legislation, Seraphine's Law and Orion's Law, requiring better training for identifying abuse and protecting witnesses. 1 year after that snowy December night, Thaddeus watched Seraphina and Orion decorating Christmas cookies, their laughter filling the kitchen. The transformation was complete. To children who had once lived in fear now radiated joy and security. Seraphina, now 7, excelled in 2nd grade and had joined the school choir. Orion, at 3.5, was a typical energetic preschooler who never tired of telling elaborate stories about his toys. Margaret arrived for Christmas Eve dinner with presents and her famous apple pie. Elena's family was thriving too. Her oldest daughter had just received a college scholarship, and Elena continued her heroic work helping other abused children. As they sat down for dinner, Seraphina said, "Christmas used to be scary, but now, it's my favorite day because families show how much they love each other." Her healing was profound and complete. After dinner, they gathered for Christmas Eve story time. Read the one about lost children finding their real family. Seraphina requested their favorite tale. And they all lived happily ever after. Thaddeus finished. "Just like us," both children said in unison. Later, tucking them into bed, he marveled at the miracle of their family, built not through birth, but through courage, choice, and love. The end.